Looking for a fun way to win up to 25 times your money this basketball season? Test your skills on Prize Picks, the most exciting way to play daily fantasy sports. Just select 2 or more players, pick more or less on their projection for a wide variety of stats, and place your entry. It's as easy as that. If you have the skills, you can turn $10 into $250 with just a few taps. Easy gameplay, quick withdrawals, and injury insurance on your picks are what make Prize Picks the #1 daily fantasy sports app. Ready to test your skills? Join the Prize Picks community of more than 7 million players who have already signed up. Right now, Prize Picks will match your first deposit up to $100. Just visit prizepicks.com/get100 and use code GET100. That's code GET100 at prizepicks.com/get100 for a first deposit match up to $100. Prize Picks, daily fantasy sports made easy.
You are listening to the Hiking Radio Network, where we talk the walk with shows by hikers, about hikers, for everybody.
I'm wondering if you'd go wandering with me through the wilderness and woods to where the winds are blowing free, through the darkness of the night.
Welcome to the Jester Section Hiker Podcast, where we talk about the continual pursuit of the section hiker.
And I'll spread the word and you beat the drum. We'll round up the troops and get the gang to come, and we'll leave the streets and these neighborhoods, head over the river and through the woods.
Welcome to the Jester Section Hiker Podcast. I'm your host, Julie Jester Gayhart, and this is the podcast where we talk about the continual pursuit of the section hiker and what it takes to complete a trail section by section. For me, it took 12 years to section hike the Appalachian Trail from June of 2006 until July of 2017. I'm an educator by day, but a hiker at heart. I'll hike north, south, backpack, slack pack, day hike, or even these days, glamp to get the job done. Welcome back to the podcast, everybody. On today's episode, we have Janet Steinert, aka Slow and Steady, as our guest. Janet and I originally met back in 2013 at the Hiker Hostel in Dahlonega, Georgia, as she was beginning her through hike attempt on the Appalachian Trail. Little did I know that Janet and I would end up hiking together in 2015, 16, and 2017. We can also thank Janet for introducing me to the song Through the Woods and the Okie Dokie Brothers. We will get more into that in just a bit. Oh, and one more thing. Janet took the picture that is in the background for the podcast artwork. Janet is a retired educator who worked as an English teacher, assistant principal, and principal before taking on the Appalachian Trail as her quest turned from a section hiker to an attempted through hike. Janet section hiked the trail during her summers off from 2004 until 2012, completing Maine south all the way to Virginia. In the spring of 2013, Janet set off on her attempted through hike, and we'll let her tell you the rest of the story. Welcome to the podcast, Janet.
Thank you. It's good to be here.
It's good to be here with you, and good to see you on screen, by the way. So one of the things that I like to do on the podcast is actually take the listeners through a timeline of actually when our guests started section hiking and why they started. But one of the first things I want to do is let everybody know, and we'll get into this more later, that Janet actually wrote a book called Slow Boots and Steady Limbs. And I want to read a little bit of that book right now to kind of get our conversation started. I began my Appalachian Trail journey on March 31st, 2013, full of hope and fear, excitement and trepidation. I had dreamed of a through hike along the Appalachian Trail for as long as I could remember. I had section hiked most of the trail during summer breaks, and I longed to start at that first blaze in Georgia and to finish at that final blaze on Mount Katahdin, and I did. But I did not complete the Appalachian Trail in the way that I had expected. So Janet, take us back to when you first started section hiking the Appalachian Trail and why you started section hiking.
Well, I come from a long line of women who set impossible goals. My grandmother worked for the company that built Spirit of St. Louis, and she flew with Charles Lindbergh on and off. My sister recently was elected as the first woman president of an all-male professional organization, or it used to be all-male. It's not anymore. So anyway, we like to set goals that are nearly impossible for us. So when I started reading about the Appalachian Trail, it's Appalachian, by the way. When I started reading,
Okay.
yeah,
Listen, I'm south of the Mason-Dixon right now. It's Appalachian.
I know, yeah, I hear that accent. Anyway, I was fascinated by it, and so I wanted a section hike. But where I live, the Appalachian Trail was a long ways away. We moved to New England, and the White Mountains were at our back door. So that was the first hike that I took, was climbing Mount Madison. And as you know, because you and I have hiked it, I don't hike Mount Madison gracefully. And I didn't that first time. It was really difficult. I had a really hard time. But like I said, we take on impossible challenges in our family. And so that just made me want to hike more. So that's how I started my section hiking. That was the first one. And after that, I would do little pieces of the White Mountains or of Maine because they were close to my house.
So when we first started chatting, when you agreed, thank goodness, to be on the podcast, you said something to me that was interesting. You said that section hiking is the gateway drug to through hiking. When you were out, I know, when you were out section hiking the trail and your summers off from 2004 until 2012, did you always have the intention that you were going to want to through hike one day?
Well, I knew I wanted to through hike, but I had my career. I was raising my children. So I was going to have to wait until I retired. And I did at 62. So I did want to do a through hike, but I loved the section hiking. And when I say, and by the way, that's not an original expression. A friend of mine said that. But when I say the section hiking is the gateway drug to through hiking, but through my section hikes, it made me want more and more of the trail and to be able to do it in longer and longer sections. And so eventually many people who section hike end up wanting to do a through hike because of their section hikes. So that's what I meant by that.
That's great. So let's talk a little bit about section hiking. I know for me that one of the things when I was avidly section hiking, during my section hike, I'd be out wherever, maybe Virginia, and I would already be planning the next one, the next one, and the next one. And as an educator like you were before you retired, we have those summers off. So did your story kind of go like that as well, that, you know, you were always planning the next one, maybe where you were going to go, how you were going to get there, logistics? What was going on during that time frame as well?
Yeah, that was the joy of section hiking, is that anticipation and that planning that you don't have with through hiking. You go through one set of anticipation and planning, and then you're there. But with section hiking, it's summer after summer after summer, or vacation after vacation, where I was looking forward to it for all year long. And then I'd get on the trail and I'd be so happy that I'm there. And I'd also be healthy. Where when I was through hiking, I wasn't necessarily healthy because of the endurance that's required for a long distance hike. But with the section hikes, I would be healthy and really happy to be on the trail.
So 2004 to 2012, you're still working. You've got, kids you're raising. You've got your husband. And in the back of your mind, I know, because I know your story, that not only are you section hiking, and as I just read the little excerpt in your book, you really wanted to through hike.
Yes. Yeah.
So take us through that attempted through hike. And there's a reason I call it an attempted through hike, and what happened as you went up the trail and begin to realize as you started, things were taking a different turn.
Well, I started as you read, I started at the end of March, and actually, I started at the trailhead at the bottom of Amicalola Falls, at the end of March. So my real beginning of my through hike attempt was April Fool's Day. So what's that tell you?
Okay, so you actually went up the approach trail.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay. And then you started, perfectly on April Fool's Day. So
Yeah.
that's hilarious. Okay, so take us from there. You're going up the trail, you're getting into life of being a through hiker. It's like everything you dreamed of. Take us up the trail a little bit.
Okay. All right. So it was a wonderful experience. I mean, it was everything that I hoped it would be for the first 4 months. And I realized that there was a lot more to the trail than just the challenge of hiking. I met wonderful people. I met you. But the challenge, I think every through hiker has a challenge, and it's the ones that can overcome that challenge that are the ones that are going to be successful. And so I had it in my mind from the very start that I would never, ever, ever give up. And I even had a magnet on my door in my office that said that, never, ever, ever, ever give up. And that was what I modeled for my students. So I wasn't going to give up unless I was at death's door and would have to be dragged to the hospital, which is about what happened.
I laugh. It's really not funny, but so take us through. You get through Georgia, you're celebrating, you're going north up the trail.
Yeah. So when I was in Virginia, I hurt my leg and it got infected. So I went to the emergency room. They gave me some antibiotics. And I went on my merry way and it healed. What I didn't know is that certain combinations of antibiotics are not good for you and they have side effects, which ordinarily wouldn't hurt a person. But when your immune system is compromised by the kind of work that's involved in doing a day-to-day through hike of 15 to 20 miles a day, your body starts to break down. And that's what was happening to me. So by the time I reached Pennsylvania, I thought I was really strong, but something bit me and it again caused another infection.
So Janet, real quick, when you say that your body, you were feeling really strong, did you also feel at the same time that something might be wrong, or that didn't affect you? You just thought you were feeling good, or something in your mind go, ooh, something's wrong here?
No, I don't have that kind of common sense.
Okay. All right. Well, we'll continue on with that.
Yeah. Now, what happens, I think, with most through hikers, actually, and this was happening with me, is I hurt all the time. So something additional that's hurting, I'm not going to notice it because I just always hurt. So when that was happening, I didn't realize that I was getting sick. And so when we stopped at the road crossing, we were headed for a shelter called Bake Oven Knob. Now, if that doesn't tell you something.
I can picture Bake Oven Knob right now because that's where a lot of the graffiti is on the rocks on the trail. So you put me right there. I know exactly where it's at.
Yeah. And it's just hot and dry and awful in the middle of the summer. So that's where we were headed. But there was a road crossing we stopped at before we got there. Now, as you remember, Bake Oven Knob is also in the middle of nowhere. If I were to hike there, I'd have to walk my way out of there. So anyway, we stopped at the road crossing and I pulled my sock down because, my leg was bothering me and it was really swollen. And the guy with me goes, you've got to get that checked out. I mean, it was so swollen, my leg had no definition. It looked like an elephant's leg.
Janet, I'm not sure how you didn't notice that, but hey, I'm going with it.
It hurt a little, but I just kept on going. So I said, okay, we'll hitchhike. We went into Palmerton and the doctor took one look at that and he says, your hike is done. What I didn't realize was those antibiotics I'd had in Virginia were working on me as well. So I had a lot going on and I had some infections that could have been fatal. So I had to get off. But I'll tell you, the whole time I was in the hospital, I kept thinking, plan B, how am I getting back on?
Okay, so you started in March. You got through Virginia. You had some issues. You took some antibiotics. And then when you got to Pennsylvania, your leg was so swollen, but you didn't notice. And then, basically they go and they tell you your hike is done. And then at this point, you did go home for a little bit, right?
Yes. So I didn't want to sit in that hospital in Pennsylvania. So I went home, and this was going to be plan B. I was going to start from the bottom of Maine, hike up to Katahdin, then go back and then hike south to Palmerton. So that's what I was thinking. But when I got home, the doctor took one look at me and said, I'm putting you back in the hospital. So they put a port in my chest since I couldn't get IVs anymore since everything was shutting down. So I'm thinking I'm getting back on the trail. So 2 days after they take the port out of my chest, I'm back on that trail in Maine. I did. I got back on the trail in Maine and I hiked to Katahdin.
So basically, did you start, I think you told me you started outside of Gorham, right?
Correct. Yeah, that was hard. And it was about 3 weeks I was off the trail. And so I got back on the trail expecting I would be able to hike like I did before. Like I said before, I don't have any common sense. So I got on the trail and hiked to Gentian Pond, which was about 10 miles, and it about killed me. But I did it. I did Maine. It was the hardest state, but it was the most beautiful state. And got to Katahdin, and my husband joined me. We hiked up to the top of Katahdin. But what I didn't realize was that because I had not let myself heal, and I was still compromised, I ended up getting sick again. And so when I left Katahdin, I wasn't able to hike that plan that I had to start in Gorham and hike down to Palmerton. So what I did was I got better, but by then there was snow in the White Mountains. The huts were closed, any roads were closed, the shuttles were gone, and I wouldn't have a plan B. I had never hiked winter hiking, so I didn't. Finally, common sense was starting to kick in, and it would be safe to do the White Mountains in the winter. So I had to wait until the snow melted. But as soon as the snow melted, I was back on that trail to finish it, and I did make it to Palmerton. But that was the interruption of the miles, making it not a through hike.
So basically, normal people, which I don't know who normal people are because I'm not normal, you're not normal. So a normal person would have said, you know what? I've already section hiked this. I've already gone from Palmerton to Gorham. All right, it didn't end up being a through hike. I'm still alive. Okay, let's get on with our lives. No, not Janet. I know in your mind, and you said this, you were already trying to figure out, but it's not safe to go through the Whites. So the very next year, 2014, you already said you went back.
Yeah.
And completed from Palmerton to Gorham in 2014. Why was that important to you, even though you had already done that through your section hiking?
Well, I set this goal that I was going to hike the whole thing. So even though I had done that, I wanted this journey to complete all 2,185.9 miles. So it was important for me to go back. But I will tell you there, Julie, that while I was doing it, there were times when I said to myself, what are you doing? You've already done it. But it was important to me to hike all the miles in that. So now I've hiked 1.5 of the Appalachian Trail, maybe a little more.
And I know, and you and I have had conversations about this just from you and I being out hiking, that you still have it in your mind that we haven't talked since really on the trail since 2017, but in your mind, one of the last things you told me is that you would still like to do a through hike because you still haven't through hiked the trail. Is that still the case, or where's Janet at right now?
Well, I go back and forth on that. I've done some through hikes of smaller trails since then, and I didn't have that joy that I had before, and maybe it's because I'm getting older, I don't know. But I have this thing eating at me that I set this goal of a through hike, and I'd never let a goal go. So I may.
I don't know. I have a feeling. I've got a feeling over the next year or so, or who knows, the next several years, Slow and Steady might be back out there again.
Yeah.
So in our initial chat, we talked about section hiking. You've been out there, and Janet was my savior many times on the trail in the years that we hiked. There's disappointment and things that people have to get through. And it's okay being a section hiker. It's okay for something to happen during your through hike. And you stated to me that many people experience circumstances beyond their control that prevent them from completing the trail as a through hike. As a result of this, there are many emotions that they have to come to terms with. So talk to us about what you meant by that statement.
Well, pretty much. I think that at first, when I was hiking through Maine, I went through a lot of back and forth because I knew I wasn't strong and I wasn't sure I could finish the trail, but I wanted to so badly. And so I'd say, yep, I'm going to do it. I'm going to finish. And then something would happen and I'd think, I can't do this. And I can't admit to myself that I can't do something. So that was a real hard emotion to deal with. And even when I was done and I had hiked all 2,185.9 miles, I still couldn't resolve to myself that I hadn't done a through hike. So it was important. But I've had some time to reflect, and I've spoken to a lot of people who've been through similar experiences. One thing that I've discovered is that there are a lot of people who say they've through hiked, but they've skipped huge sections. So what happens is that term through hiking starts to lose its meaning when you hear something like that.
Right.
To me, the real respect for through hiking, if that's a goal, goes to the through hikers who have actually walked every single mile of the Appalachian Trail in one season. But that's not to say that section hiking is not difficult. Section hiking has its own set of difficulties that through hiking doesn't have. And that's where anybody who's completed all those miles should be proud of themselves, because that's such a hard goal. I mean, section hiking, as you know, you get on the trail. When I would do that, my trail legs wouldn't be there. I'd have to work up to the mileage. I didn't have the same, like a hiking family, that group of people in through hiking that is met. I was more on my own, but I would meet people. I still had that experience that was wonderful. But it was hard. Section hiking is very, very difficult. But still, like I said before, you got that joy, that anticipation. And when I got on the trail, I would be so happy and I would be so healthy. And now when I do little sections, I see how much fun the Appalachian Trail is. And I'm not so sure when I was through hiking that it was fun.
That's interesting. That might be just a good way to leave that, and we'll see what happens next. Okay. But I don't know if I believe you, Janet. I want to get into this awesome book you wrote, and it's basically based around your trail journals from 2013. So the title of your book is Slow Boots and Steady Limbs, which, by the way, everybody, can be purchased on Amazon. And I highly recommend for anyone who wants the real truth about what's happening out there on the trail and the characters and the different things you come across. Was it your intention all along to write the book based on your journals? And then how did you come up with the title?
Okay, it was definitely my intention to write a book. Even when I was section hiking, I kept really detailed journals. I was an English teacher originally, so I always had another difficult goal of writing a book. I just didn't know what I was going to write about. So when I started section hiking, keeping those journals, I thought, oh, this will make a great book if I can somehow put it together. So in my through hike, or attempted through hike, I kept really detailed journals. And every night I would go on my little tiny phone and type into the notes section my journals with the intention of writing a book. Now, Slow Boots and Steady Limbs wasn't my original idea for the title. The first title was going to be 5 Naked Guys on the Rocks. And
now that sounds interesting.
Yeah, I thought that was a pretty good idea. And the way that came about was after the first 100 miles up on Mount Albert, there were 5 guys there, and they were hot, and they all took off their shirts, but this is in spring, a long winter has happened. They were white. They look like beached whales, all 5 of them. You guys don't put your shirts back on. I'm going to take a picture of you, and I'm going to write a book, and I'm going to call it 5 Naked Guys on the Rocks, and you're going to be on the cover. Well, they didn't move.
So they probably loved it, right?
Yeah, they wanted it. Well, so that's a chapter. But after I'd written the book, my niece, who is in marketing, looked at the title and she said, Auntie Janet, that does not capture the journey that you went through and the fact that somebody who's 62 years old hiked all those miles. And you need something that doesn't make people think that your book is going to be another 50 Shades of Grey. So
I don't know, Janet, that might be a good one too. You may want to work on that one next.
Yeah, the sequel. So anyway, we worked on it and came up with Slow Boots, which I had, and Steady Limbs, meaning I very rarely took breaks. I kept going.
Nice. And I think that's kind of based on your trail name too, Slow and Steady, right? So you want to tell us how your trail name came about?
Well, I mean, it actually was a progression. Actually, that came about when I was section hiking. I was slow. My son was steady. And so we were slow and steady. And so
I don't know if I ever knew that. I don't think I did know that for some reason.
We were slow and steady. And then I did the long trail, and my son did not hike it with me. So I called myself Slow Unsteady, without steady. So Slow Unsteady. And people said that might come to fruition. You might not want to call yourself unsteady. So they changed it to Slow and Steady. And after that, I was slow and steady forever.
I love it. And by the way, for everyone out there, she is steady, but she's certainly not slow on the trail. So Jane and I have actually, we've actually put in a lot of miles together. And I asked Janet if she wanted to, talk a little bit about what it was like hiking with me. And she said, well, what do you want me to talk about? The time you stabbed me with a hiking pole, the time you wanted me to take a splinter out of your rear end, the time I left Janet on top of Mount Madison when she was almost hyperthermic. Then I broke down in Madison Hut the next morning and we headed up to Mount Washington in terrible conditions. Or the time I almost fell off the ledge. You had to remind me of that one.
Yeah, we had some good times. Good times.
Yeah, so pick one, Janet. I mean, which one do you want to talk about?
But that's what hiking with another person is. We supported each other. I mean, it's not like I was doing so great and you were supportive of me, like the time we were at a shelter and I realized I only had half of my Aquamira drops, so I couldn't purify my water. And you kindly let me use your battery run, whatever that thing is called. What is
that? I forgot what it was called now.
I don't know, but
SteriPen. It was a SteriPen.
SteriPen, yeah. So you lent that to me, and you could have lost battery life for that. When we were hiking up to Mount Washington and I was wearing too many clothes and couldn't understand why I was going slower and slower, you pointed out to me that maybe I needed to take off a few layers. So we support each other and laugh. I mean, the time we climbed Mount Abe and we sang, no, it wasn't Mount Abe, it was Jackson. And we sang that Johnny Cash song all the way up. So that's that camaraderie that you get when you're hiking with another person just can't be matched. And that's what brings this community together, is that relationship that you have with people as you hike with them. And so in spite of you stabbing me with your hiking pole, a precipice, I might add, as I was going down, or making me fall on a bog bridge, I love you anyway.
Now, Janet, just because you fell on the bog bridge, because we were so excited to see the shelter, I think I screamed, there it is, we're here. And I don't know what happened. I turned around and you were like in the mud.
Yeah, you're easy to blame. I looked up and my foot went off the bog bridge, but that's my fault.
But one of my favorite moments with us is Janet saved me in the whites, by the way. I had a couple things happen to me where I had fallen and I don't know, dislocated my shoulder a couple of times. And I was deathly afraid of the whites. And you pretty much hiked every mile of the whites with me. And when you and I had to shimmy ourselves up into that crevice, going up Wildcat C or whatever it was.
Yeah.
When I saw you shimmying up that, like, I was like, this woman's my hero. Like, I'm not sure how I'm going to get up this, but you got up that and turned around and said, now, come on now, if I did it, you could do it. Like, I just remember you taking your pack off and lifting it up and pushing it up on a ledge. And so thank you, Janet.
That's nice. Keep going.
So, Janet, you were very vital. That's all I'm going to say to me finishing my first section hike of the entire Appalachian Trail. And it probably won't be the last time you'll see me because I'm working on my second section hike of the Appalachian Trail. So we will definitely hike together again.
And that's beautiful. Yeah, that's, and that's the thing about hiking the Appalachian Trail, whether you're section hiking, you're through hiking, the people I met are still very close friends of mine, and you being one of them, in spite of the injuries that I incurred because of you. But it's a special relationship, I think, that people who hike together have.
All right, Janet, enough about me. I know you met some other interesting people out on the trail in 2013, but you also met a very special group of guys that were out on the trail for 30 days writing songs for a new album. Tell us about that group and your interaction with them on the trail.
Okay. Yeah, they were a great group of guys. So what happened was I went to trail days, and the guy that was driving me, the shuttle driver, said to me, there's a group of guys out on the trail, and they're making a documentary about the Appalachian Trail. They're called the Okie Dokie Brothers. And I said, oh, well, that sounds interesting. He goes, yeah, maybe you'll meet them. So I had that in my head. So as I'm hiking, he dropped me off, and I was at Mount Rogers State Park, and I'm hiking up to Thomas Knob's shelter. And I got to the shelter, I'm settling in, and this group of guys shows up, and they look just like thru hikers, except some of them had guitars on their backs. And
well, that was an indication right there.
There's something right there. They had a lot of stuff. So I took a dare, and I said to them, you wouldn't happen to be the Okie Dokie Brothers, would you? And to me, yeah, have you heard of us? Well, I just heard of them when we were driving up. And I said, oh, yeah, everyone on the trail knows who you are. We started talking and telling trail stories, and we had a lot of fun just shooting the breeze. So they said to me, would you mind if we interviewed you for our documentary? Which was wonderful. Oh, great. I'm going to be famous on the trail. So they got all their out and started to interview me, and I went cold. I forgot everything. I couldn't even remember my trail name. The microphone in my face, I couldn't talk anymore, but they were really nice guys. The thing that made that experience so memorable was not my interview, but that night while we were all sitting around in the shelter, they were working on their music, their songs, and they were still finishing them and writing them and trying them out. And Through the Woods was one of them. And so I got to hear that song as they were in the process of refining it. And it was to be on the Appalachian Trail in the middle of the woods, listening to the words of that song where they say that with a band of vagabonds is, I think, part of it. And that's what we were, listening to the wind through the trees. It just really captured what we were experiencing, and hearing that song meant a lot. So the fact that you've chosen it for this podcast means a lot. It's a beautiful song, and they were just wonderful guys.
Well, you're the reason for that, Janet, because you put like a little video clip together of us. I don't know what year it was, 16 or 17, of one of our trips to the Whites. And I just remembered that song, and I was like, I think Janet knows those guys. So that's when I texted you and said, hey, listen, what's that group? You texted me back and said, it's the Okie Dokie Brothers. And so I went on their website, and I was like, well, I'll give it a whirl. Sent them an email. And Justin sent me an email less than 24 hours later and said, absolutely, we'd love for you to use our song. We love the Appalachian Trail. They remembered you, Slow and Steady. And they even said, hey, she was in our video. So thank you again for that. Thank you for taking the picture for the artwork. And yes, if it weren't for the trail characters around us, we wouldn't have anything to laugh and talk about. So I appreciate it, Janet.
Yeah, well, it's great.
So now we've come to the point in the podcast where the guest is actually going to sign off for us by reading their own journal entry, statement, or quote that will inspire us to keep hiking section by section.
Well, one of the joys of the trail is staying in hostels that exist to help hikers. And Shaw's Hostel in Monson, Maine is the last stop before the 100-mile wilderness. And it's also the 100-mile wilderness is the final 100 miles before completing the Appalachian Trail. When I reached that point, I was grappling with the fact that it no longer was my final 100 miles, since I still had that section that we talked about that I'd skipped. But in this section that I'm going to read today, you will see that I gained a new understanding about my journey on the Appalachian Trail at Shaw's Hostel that morning. I strolled along the rain-soaked streets of Monson until I reached Shaw's Hostel, an older Victorian home, and I entered through a side door. The fragrance of freshly brewed coffee and bacon greeted me, and I found a seat at the large dining table. Hikers filtered down the stairs, and soon the room was full of lively conversation. This was a big day, for today I would enter the 100-mile wilderness. Before my hike, I referred to the 100-mile wilderness as my victory march. I pictured myself hiking those last miles of the AT, feeling victorious at completing a through hike. But now I was not so sure. I didn't know what to call it except a scary and remote 100 miles. A man sat next to me but didn't say a word, and I wondered if he was as nervous as I was. His companion joined us and sat on the other side of him. Her hands moved rapidly in sign language, and the man responded. I watched them communicate with dancing hands, fascinated at the beauty of their movements. Are you both hiking the AT? I asked. Well, we're trying, she responded. We go very slowly because he can't see well and he falls a lot. I was in utter amazement. How could I ever complain about my difficulties? Here was a guy who was facing the rigors of Maine and couldn't even see the views or hear the birds. I somehow knew it, but never gave it much thought until this morning. There is so much more to the Appalachian Trail than just the views. I'd tried to take in every viewpoint. I even went off trail at times to catch a view from a side trail. But through this journey, I was learning that those views do not make up the entire picture. The people of the trail had enriched my life in so many ways. The kindness of strangers when I needed help. The unexpected cooler full of snacks or water bottles placed at a trailhead where there were no water sources. Words of encouragement from people I'd never met before. This was the essence of trail life. Beyond the distant sights of the trail were many other sensory experiences, but the people I met, these deepened the trail experience for me. My intent when I began the journey was to never, ever give up. I may not have completed a through hike, but it didn't matter anymore. I realized that after this, I would have walked the entire length of the Appalachian Trail. I also realized that having a dream that may hold insurmountable obstacles is worth the journey. You will find that you can do what you never thought possible. All it takes is a belief in yourself and a drive to never, ever give up. Along the way, you will discover a world you never thought possible, a you that you never knew existed.
Thank you, Janet. I really appreciate it.
You're welcome. It was my pleasure.
All right. Talk to you soon.
Yeah.
Thanks for being on the show, Janet. I always love catching up with you and talking trail. The week before Janet and I recorded this episode, a dear friend of hers passed away suddenly while out hiking with the Green Mountain Club. I would like to dedicate this week's episode to Jean Haigh, who lost her life on the trail that day doing what she loved, hiking. The Green Mountain Club executive director, Mike DeBonis, wrote this about Jean. Jean built and maintained an unparalleled network of friends within Vermont's recreation community and was a mentor to a generation of trail stewards. We will miss her spirited ways and extend heartfelt condolences to her family and all who loved her. Next up, we have Let's Talk Gear with Steve Kammeyer as we continue our talks about gear. Welcome back to Let's Talk Gear with Steve Kammeyer. Last episode, we talked about our second item in the big three, which was the tent. Steve gave us some excellent tips on how to look for things when purchasing a tent and all the options that are out there when it comes to styles, tent materials, different sizes, and more. In this episode, we are going to talk about the third item in our big three gear list, which is the sleeping bag. I know for myself, I have a couple different sleeping bags depending on the time of year, etc., and what's happening. I'm looking forward to see what Steve has to say about sleeping bags. Welcome back to the podcast, Steve, and Happy New Year.
Hey, thank you. Happy New Year to you and to all the listeners as well. Thank you so much for having me.
Really appreciate you coming back. And full disclosure here, Steve and I are actually re-recording this episode for January 1st because we are not happy with the audio and wanted to make sure that we got it right, especially for January 1st and it being a Happy New Year. So here we are re-recording actually on the day that the second episode came out. And so this is going to be real close to January. So we'll get right to it. Steve, here we go with sleeping bags. So basically sleeping bags are very individual when it comes to personal comfort, warmth, and the style of the bag. Talk us through some things we should know and look for when it comes to the purchase of a sleeping bag for backpacking.
Absolutely. First of all, thank you so much for having me on here. This turned out to be a really, really cool event. And so I do thank you so much. And yes, Happy New Year, everybody. Happy New Year. When it comes to sleeping bags, holy cow. I think the first and foremost thing that folks need to realize is that sleeping bags are rated on a temperature level. Some manufacturers want to give the lowest number possible for the best price possible. So there are two different ratings here. There are comfort ratings and there is survival ratings. And you definitely want to look at that. If you buy a 0-degree bag and that is a survival rating, that means that you will stay alive at 0 degrees, but you're not going to be very, very comfortable at all. So definitely check out those. And what they call them is actually EN ratings. And that is really sincerely something that you want to keep an eye on. Is your sleeping bag comfort rated or is it survival rated?
So how are we going to know the difference in that? So basically, I know in my closet right now, I've probably got a 20-degree bag, a 30-degree bag, and a 40-degree bag. And if it's comfort, am I looking for comfort rated or am I looking, what am I looking for to make sure I've got the right thing?
Well, I think actually if you are finding a bag that is comfort rated, then yes, you should compare that to the coldest temperatures that you would possibly be sleeping in. If you're going to be sleeping in, say, 20-degree Fahrenheit temperatures, and you find a sleeping bag that is comfort rated for 20-degree Fahrenheit, then you're going to be good to go. But
okay,
if this is a survival rated sleeping bag, you might want to, in our term, size up a little bit, which in temperature ratings means size down, I guess you could say.
Gotcha.
So yeah, if you're going to be sleeping in 20-degree temperatures, and you might be looking for a survival bag that says 0 degrees, which is going to keep you comfortable at 20 degrees.
Okay. And if I'm looking for a comfort bag at 20 degrees, I'm actually looking for a 20-degree comfort bag. Is that correct?
Correct. Yep. Absolutely correct. Again, as far as tents and backpacks and everything else goes these days, these manufacturers want to give you the best numbers possible for the best price possible. and they're going to tell you anything that you want to hear. So a lot of folks, a lot of sleeping bag manufacturers are going with what is now known as survival rating, which means they can advertise the lowest possible temperature, and tell you, yeah, sure, we're going to keep you alive at 0 degrees, but you're not going to be comfortable and you're barely going to stay alive. That's about it.
You're going to be shivering in that bag for sure.
There's going to be some teeth chattering. Yeah, for sure.
Now let's get into, this could go for a while, but let's get into down fill in the bag. Now I know some companies are doing goose down, some companies are doing duck down, I guess. And I've even heard of some companies doing like a possum down. So tell me what I'm looking for. And I know we're talking about a down bag, and there's also a synthetic bag. So when would I look for a down, and then when would I look for a synthetic?
Oh, absolutely. Down is truly the way to go if you have the money. Obviously, down costs money. Not to take anything away from synthetic bags, there are some amazing synthetic materials out there today. There's two major differences between those two. First is cost. Down is always going to cost more. In some cases, it costs 2 or 3 times more. But again, the biggest difference is probably moisture. When you get a synthetic bag wet, let's say you have an accident and you fall into the creek or whatever, your synthetic bag is still going to keep you warm, even if it is wet. There is still some warmth properties involved there. With down, even with treated down, 9 times out of 10, once it gets wet, it is going to lose all of its insulating properties. So it's a big, how do you do hike your own hike, whatever. There's a huge price difference. There's a huge weight difference. Synthetic is always going to cost less and way more, but it is 100% guaranteed every time to keep you warm no matter what. Whereas down, as finicky as it is, it's always going to be lighter. It's always going to cost more. And it's just so comfortable and so awesome. But you have to be very, very, very careful to not get it wet.
Now, I know one thing that confuses me. So you've gone over the rating and we've gone kind of over down versus synthetic. So what about the fill in the bag? Oh, this one has 950. This one has 800. This one has 700. I don't know what any of that means. I just have to kind of go, yep, this one cost me $500. It ought to be good, right?
Right. Well, yeah, that is a big difference. And it's funny because these days, this is something that's come a long ways over the last decade or so. Downfill, there really, really used to be a big difference between 700 and 900 fill. And nowadays we have 1,000 fill, which is just insanity. There is a huge difference, but it's not really a whole lot to worry about these days because almost every quilt sleeping bag manufacturer is in the 800 to 900 downfill range. And that's not only just because of the cost, but that's because what is available these days, which is really, really good for us as a consumer. There is a little bit of a difference between, say, an 850 and a 900 fill, but it's very, very small. I actually have customers all the time demanding, I want a 900 fill, I want a 900 fill. And I think they just don't realize there's not that much difference between an 850 fill and a 900 fill. There is a little bit, but over the amount of an entire sleeping bag or a quilt, you're talking like 1 or 2 ounces. And it's really not that big of a deal for the money involved.
Right. So is one going to keep you, so if somebody's asking for 900, is there something in their mind that makes them think, oh, that's going to keep me warmer? Or, I mean, what would be the difference?
Well, I think a lot of people have this in their mind that the higher the number, the better off we are.
Gotcha.
The truth of the matter is, if you buy a sleeping bag or a quilt that is rated for 20 degrees, say, it doesn't matter what that sleeping bag is filled with. It's still rated to be 20 degrees, whether it's
gotcha
synthetic material or it's 850 fill down, or it's 900 fill down, or it's 950 fill down. It's still rated to be the same. What we're talking about here is the weight of the actual quilt itself. how much material does it take to fill that sleeping bag or quilt to keep you warm at 20 degrees? And the higher the fill power, the less the weight goes. But again, the difference between a 900 fill and an 800 fill is minuscule. It really is not much. The money aspect of it can be pretty dramatic. So there's really no sense in spending all that extra money for an extra ounce.
Gotcha. Okay. So we've got that figured out. And I'm going to ask you this because we talked about it before. I am stuck in a mummy bag. Now, I am this close, the listeners can't see me, but really close to buying a quilt. So you got to talk to me about the mummy bag versus the quilt. And yeah, I roll over my bag and next thing I know, I'm wrapped up in it. I can't breathe. All this stuff is going on. So, and I know people are going to quilts. So talk to us about the value of a quilt versus the mummy, your traditional mummy style bag.
Right. I am actually the toughest convert ever to come from sleeping bags to quilts. It took me forever and a day to be converted into quilts. But I think once you go quilts, you just never go back. And it is honestly, it's just pure science. When you use a traditional sleeping bag, the part that you are laying on, the back of the bag, as we say, is essentially worthless, no matter what it's made of, whether it be synthetic or down or whatever. The part that you are laying on, the part that's, let's say, it's smashed between your back and the sleeping pad, is essentially worthless. There is no insulating properties there. So with a quilt is a backless sleeping bag, if you can imagine that. And it is so much lighter. The weight difference between the two is incredibly different. You take a 20-degree sleeping bag and compare it to a 20-degree quilt, and it's a night and day difference when it comes to weight. Quilts are really, really, really the way to go these days, especially for that ultralight packer. But when you start talking quilts, your sleeping pad means everything. And I think that's probably something we're going to get into in another episode. But your sleeping pad.
No, actually, we can talk about that now if you want to, because if I'm going to switch the quilt, I got to know what kind of sleeping pad, because the sleeping pad has a rating too, right? That you have to really think about, because that's the difference between the ground and you, right?
Right. Yeah. Your sleeping pad means way more than your sleeping bag or your quilt does. Temperature rating means everything, especially in colder temperatures, which I'm a huge fan of. And I do a lot of my hiking above 10,000 feet up in the mountains, and temperatures can get pretty chilly. So yes, absolutely. Your sleeping pad can be one of the 2 or 3 things that can literally save your life. You really, really, really do not want to skimp on your sleeping pad. And especially, again, if you're going to be using a quilt over a sleeping bag, which is these days the way to go. You really should be using a quilt. But you absolutely have to keep an eye on your sleeping pad and the temperature rating for that. Get something insulated, get something that's going to keep you up off of the ground, and get something comfortable.
Right. And as I get older and I'm backpacking, I want like a really nice pad and a really good pillow. So before, used to, I'd be like, oh, I'll just skimp, and not anymore. So I'm almost there with the bag, Steve. And speaking of, so if our listeners want to reach out to you and talk to you about, because I know they can order a bag from you, what's the best way for them to do that? Or is there a way?
Yeah, sure. I mean, obviously just getting hold of me through the backpacking gear flea market is always going to be the easiest way. Yeah, definitely. Anybody can email me personally. It's Steve Kammeyer, STEVEKAMMEYER @gmail.com. And I would love to help folks out. I mean, some people are still better in a traditional sleeping bag. For the most of us, quilts are the way to go. But if you want to have that conversation, I'm always available to have it.
And I think that'd be great, because again, some of these things we've been talking about, the backpack, the tent, and now the sleeping bag, the quilt, and the sleeping pad, a lot of that is individual too, based on, like yourself. I mean, you love going up above 10,000 feet, cold temperatures. Some people only hike when it's really warm outside. So it's really going to be depending on what they want.
Definitely.
which I think that's great that people can reach out to you. So pretty much this wraps up our 3 episodes of Let's Talk Gear on the topic of the big 3. Next episode, we will dive into the world of stoves and cooking gear on the trail, and really looking forward to you guys hearing that. But Steve, I got a question for you. So because we are re-recording this, I've had some people ask if I would actually ask our guest this question. So I figure I'll start off with you. So I'm calling this What Listeners Want to Know. So listeners want to know, what is your one luxury gear item that you always carry with you hiking or backpacking, and why?
That's a loaded question.
Oh, have we put them on the spot?
I think so. You know what? It actually depends. I do not carry, I know a lot of folks would answer this with a chair. I do not carry a chair because most of my hiking, again, is above 10,000 feet, and we have plenty of rocks up there. So I don't need to carry a chair to sleep on. Honestly, I think truly it is my cell phone.
Oh, okay.
There are a lot of places where I should not be carrying my phone because there is no reason to, but I do carry it because it is my camera and it's my way of connection and all that stuff. I think maybe if it wasn't my cell phone, it would be coffee. Coffee.
So are you a hot coffee kind of guy, or will you drink it cold?
I'll drink it cold. Yeah, it's probably packaged coffee if we're gonna get serious with each other. I think that's probably it.
All right, cool. Well, very good, Steve. Again, Happy New Year to everybody. Thank you for coming back on and re-recording this. Again, listeners, we apologize for the sound quality, but hey, we're learning as we go. We really appreciate your feedback. Steve, again, thanks for chatting with us. And please go check out Steve's pages on Facebook listed in the show notes. We would love to have Steve answer some of your gear questions on the podcast. So if you have questions, please send them over to me via email at jesternc2212@gmail.com. Thanks again, Steve, and look forward to talking on the next episode.
Thank you so much.
This wraps up our 3 episodes of Let's Talk Gear on the topic of the big 3. Next episode, we will dive into the world of stoves and cooking gear on the trail. I know for me, my spoon means everything. And thanks to Steve for chatting with us. And please go check out Steve's pages on Facebook listed in the show notes. We would love to have Steve answer some of your gear questions on the podcast. So if you have any questions, please send them to me via email at jesternc2212@gmail.com.
I'm wondering if you'd go wandering with me through the wilderness and woods to where the winds are blowing free, through the darkness of the night, heading toward the morning light. I wonder if you'd wander with me, and I'll spread the word and you beat the drum. We'll round up the troops and get the gang to come, and we'll leave the streets and these neighborhoods, head over the river and through the woods. You're wondering if I go wandering with you, what kind of trouble we'll get ourselves into. Would it be wrong to tag along with a band of vagabonds? You wonder if I'd wander with you. So I'll spread the word and you beat the drum. We'll round up the troops and get the gang to come, and we'll leave the streets and these neighborhoods, head over the river. I'm wondering if you'd come wandering my way. If you ever get lost, or if the trail leads you astray, the music of the pack can always bring you back. I wonder, can we wander away? And I'll spread the word, and you beat the drum. Round up the troops, and get the gang to come. And we'll leave the streets in these neighborhoods, head over the river and through the woods.
Wells Fargo presents one of the surest ways to grow your money. A Wells Fargo CD account, where you can earn a 5.00% annual percentage yield on an 11-month term with a minimum opening deposit of $5,000. Visit a Wells Fargo branch or wellsfargo.com/CD rates to open a CD account and start growing your savings with us.
Wells Fargo Bank, N.A., member FDIC.